Welcome to the Mischief Maker broadcast, where chaos, creativity, and common sense collide. Your host, Joel Freeman, was kicked out of high school in Alberta, Canada. He left home at 17 and hitchhiked around North America as a long-haired hippie and dope-smoking fool. He made a 180-degree change, becoming one of the first chaplains in the history of the NBA. As a professional speaker, Joel has traveled to well over 55 countries. His many books have been published in 28 foreign translations. Pieces from his Black History collection have been seen by millions at the United Nations and many other venues. And now, the Chief Mischief Maker himself, Dr. Joel A. Freeman.
Welcome, everyone. It's good to have you here for the next hour. And we're going to be talking about a very fascinating topic. It's the Rosetta Stone. And I have a number of items in my collection that I think that I hope I can share a lot of these items in the collection that I have. For instance, this piece right here is 1922. This is not a first edition. I have a first edition, which is 1913. That if you were to visit the British Museum and you were to ask them about the Rosetta Stone, and they'd say, well, why don't you buy this souvenir booklet about the Rosetta Stone? So here you see the image of the Rosetta Stone itself, and then all the information by Wallace Budge about the Rosetta Stone, how the code was cracked and everything. And so we're going to be talking about this item. In fact, I'll be showing this image right here a little bit as I describe a little bit about the way that the code was cracked to the hieroglyphics. I want to back up a little bit because my first understanding of the Rosetta Stone, a lot of people, when they hear about it, they think about the language software company. And that's a good starting point because it's about linguistics, it's about language, learning Spanish and these types of things. But to connect that to the historical piece, we need to go back to 196 BC. We have the Ptolemaic Empire run by the Greeks because Alexander the Great had conquered Egypt. And we know that when we go way back to Narmer-Menez, he was the first dynasty of Egypt. And what happened is that he opened up the delta of the Nile. And that's really how, when you look at the Nile River, that's the life blood of the entire country of Egypt and many other countries in Africa. But he built this delta region in the northern part of Egypt, which really helped with agriculture. And so what happened was that from that point on, we had this incredible thousands of years of the Egyptians being the center of the universe, if you will. They conquered, they ruled, and we have a lot of other nations, the Hebrew nation, other nations intersecting with the country of Egypt. And then we move on and we can see that up to about the 25th dynasty, that was with Shabaka, Pianki, and Tarharka, who is actually mentioned in the Bible in Isaiah 37 and 1 Kings 19, I believe, off the top of my head. But it's he was not at that time in the scriptures in the Bible. He was not the Pharaoh. He was the general of the army, but later on became Pharaoh. After the 25th dynasty, Egypt took a fall of epic proportion. And we have the Medes and the Persians coming in. There's a brief Egyptian revival. And then, of course, we usher in the Hellenistic, the empire of Greece with Alexander the Great. And that was the Ptolemaic Empire. And then after that, we have the Romans and so on. Well, what happened, and the Ottomans were very much a part of this. We now fast forward to a time, I've got some story in my camera, sometimes does a little bit of its own. And when I make a movement, it's one of these fancy cameras I don't know how to turn off from its movement. But anyway, what happened is that we now fast forward to 1799. That's the time when Napoleon He got it in his mind that he wanted to go to Egypt. And the reason why he wanted to go to Egypt is because there's several reasons. First of all, we had 10 years in France, the French Revolution, and there was a tremendous amount of issues involved with that. And so in some ways, Napoleon wanted to get everyone's eye off of the let them eat cake and the financial issues, the terrible conditions, the living conditions in France at the time. And there's nothing like a war to get that started. But before we go further, I'd like to play a video, a music video that a friend of mine by the name of Mark SX, that's his stage name. His name is Mark Smith. I asked him to write a song. I said, now I want you to write a song for young people especially, and of course kids of all ages, regardless of your demographic, if you're from Australia, from Japan, from UK, Canada, United States, wherever you're from, India. This genre of music may not connect with you. It doesn't really connect with me, more of a hip hop form. But I want you to be thinking of young people as you watch this music video, because I wanted him to put together a song that would, in 4 minutes or so, would help to explain the whole story of the Rosetta Stone. And then we can hitchhike off of that and continue with the show tonight. So Mel, behind the scenes, would you just play that song, please?
Every rock star has a story. Here's a piece of mind. May it bring peace of mind. Rosetta, Rosetta. I started out once upon a quarry, around granite and lime, looking for a way to shine. Rosetta, Rosetta. Now all I wanna do is inspire you to look inside, to take your eyes off technology, look into the light. Don't let go of the higher you, put up a fight. I've come such a long way to remind you of why.
A French Revolution made room for more solutions, but due to a lack of ships, that plan was ruined. Until word from Egypt said the empire was falling by some French merchants already there losing bargains. Perhaps the Brit problem could be solved if they charged in, make it to the Red Sea and Indian Ocean targets. Clip the route to riches and the British lose the markets. Of all the other ways, this one seems to be the smartest. In walked the odyssey of a French war prodigy, known for everything you can think of but modesty. Corsican born with Italian blood, he hated, swapped the letters in his name, and the Frenchman he became it. Beloved war vet looking for what comes next. Napoleon Bonaparte, ego beating in his chest. The directors talked it over and the timing was great. All of this decided March 1798. The order came 12 April to get it by blood. Invade by August just before the Nile floods. To liberate Egyptians and be cool with the Ottomans. Trick them both to see invaders as a better option. 50,000 strong, the opposite of nonchalance. Included were 167 savants. These men knew how to spot treasure at a glance. If they could have known, I wouldn't make it back to France.
Every rock star has a story. Here's a piece of mind. May it bring peace of mind. I started out once upon a quarry, around granite and lime, looking for a way to shine.
July 1799, plans crumpled to a pile at Fort Julian, west branch of the Nile. Bonaparte forces on the march once again to duke it out with the Turkish in the legacy defense. The fort needed much reinforcement. Lieutenant Bouchard was in charge as the source of it. The demolition woke me up, and just luckily someone saw my darkness in the light and discovered me. But what was on my pretty granite face was worth mentioning. From top to bottom, 3 horizontal inscriptions. Bottom one in Greek, the middle one demotic. The final script being hieroglyphic hieroglyphic was up top of it, 3/4 of a ton. More studies to behold, the savants told to translate by General Minot. The Greek part was easiest, but no slow feet. Last sentence showed that what they had was a code key. Same text in 3 scripts about the reign of Ptolemy, engraved in around 157 BCE. Demotic was common Egyptian language, but still not easy to decipher cause it was ancient. The savants worked overtime just to get the hang of it. Through measurements and patience, they vowed to attain it. Meaning, if not for me, you see, Egypt's history would be doomed to fancy graffiti. You're welcome.
Now all I wanna do is inspire you to look inside, to take your eyes off technology, look into the light. Don't let go of the higher you, put up a fight. I've come such a long, long way to remind you of why.
A language laid dormant since 4th century BC. My inscription read about the 5th ruling Ptolemy. After that, my silence left Egypt in time's sand. Lost footprints blown over by the wind. But what seemed to end brought more than before. In 1802, as the spoil of war, I arrived in England as an ancient puzzle piece. Seeing men went to work seeking prestige all because of me. I slayed brilliant minds and made fools of the best. But determination is the best tool in a chest. Yeah, scholars worldwide beating one drum, but very few did it with the skill of Thomas Young. And William John Banks was also right on top of it. In 1815, he happened upon the fallen obelisk. The Greek and hieroglyphics on it read bilingual. Closer was the dream that so many would cling to. Jean-Francois Champollion was a genius, an expert with languages. Of course, he intervened and he put it all together, what they knew of what he knew. In 1822, Champollion had a breakthrough. That man was dedicated all seasons, every holiday. The work was so exhausting, he passed out for 5 days. The human mind's a solution machine. You're looking at a reason when you're looking at me. You're welcome.
Well, there we are. I hope you enjoyed that song. It's gives you in 4 minutes or so a pretty good overview, and I hope you're still with us for those who do not like the hip hop genre. And but what happened with Napoleon, to kind of bring it up to speed with where we were, what I was saying before we played the song, is that Napoleon, he wanted to go into Egypt for several reasons. Number one, probably to stick his thumb in the collective eye of Great Britain, to let them know that he was superior, to cut off the passway through what later became known as the Suez Canal to India, because here's a coin of a gentleman by the name of Tipu Sahib, a Muslim who was very much an antagonist to the British government. And so Napoleon thought, maybe I can develop an alliance with Tipu Sahib in India, and we can then form kind of a coalition against the British government. And so that was another reason he wanted to do this, so that they could have great trade route to India. And then another reason is it could be for personal reasons, where he wanted to be the ruler of Egypt. I mean, when you look at the storied careers of Egyptian monarchs, pharaohs, and you look at the crowns that they wore, and I'm not going to get into it, but a certain crown would reveal whether they were a ruler over Upper Egypt, or another crown would reveal if they're a ruler over Lower Egypt. And if they had a special crown with a combination of the two crowns, they were ruler over all of Egypt. And so Napoleon perhaps fancied himself as someone having that special crown, ruler over all of Egypt. So what happened is that in 1798, they began to make a move toward Egypt. And they first stopped off at Malta, and they plundered the treasury, the jewels, the gold, the silver of Malta, and left some soldiers there to take care of that. But then they moved on from there to just a little bit out of Alexandria. And then they marched. And you can imagine, I don't know if you've ever been to Egypt, but I remember one time when I was there, I was on the Red Sea going swimming. And I thought, I'll just take my flip-flops off and I can run across the sand. I got like 2 or 3 steps into the sand. I said, whoa, I've never experienced anything this hot. And I ran quickly back and got my flip-flops. But you can imagine the soldiers wearing these typical woolen uniforms in Egypt and marching toward Alexandria and singing the famous song of the country of France as they were marching. And, they just thought, well, here we are. They didn't know, the soldiers, no one hardly knew about this military campaign. The soldiers found out where they were going on the boat on the way to Egypt. So it was kind of a hush-hush type of a military exercise. Well, what happened is that, of course, the British caught wind. And I have a book here that I found very fascinating. I have the original copy of this book. And this is a book where what happened is that the British ended up revealing they caught a ship filled with letters. Here's a letter from General Kleber, for instance. And this was written in French. And then they would put it in English, the translation in English. And it revealed the absolute negative conditions that the soldiers were living in. The soldiers were complaining to their parents. They're saying, I don't know why I'm here. This is dangerous. We get attacked at night. And so the British actually published these letters as a propaganda tool to show how these troops were demoralized in Egypt. And then what happened is that, of course, you have a situation, and I'm looking back here because I have got a whole bunch of items in my collection I wanted to show you. But what happened is that the soldiers, they ended up in the, here it is. Here's the battle where the French, their ships actually took out all of the French ships at one time, because the French ships were all tied up together. I think it was 13 of them. And this was some of the eyewitnesses, they wrote back and said it was the most horrific experience. So now what happened is the British had the French soldiers landlocked in France, and they had no way out because all their ships had been taken out, all the provisions that were on the ships. There were 167 savants that came with Napoleon. And Napoleon, he kind of fancied himself as in fact, here's a picture of him on the ship as he's coming to France. And he's talking with savants every evening. They're discussing all kinds of things about astronomy and botany and architecture and all kinds of different things. And so what happened is that as they were marching toward Alexandria and thinking about what they're going to do, they conquered the Ottomans very quickly, very easily. And it was, there were a number of battles that they had to fight, but they took over Egypt relatively easily. And they set up in Cairo with the 167 savants. These were experts in botany, architecture, entomology, hydrology, and a number of other disciplines. And these mostly gentlemen set up an institute, which became known as the Institut Egyptien. And I have a coin here that I have an original coin from the Institut Egyptien. This is dated 1859. And it was started in 1798, if you can see that. And it mentions folks like Bonaparte, Monge, and Jomard, and they were the main leaders of the group of savants. And so what happened is that Napoleon utilized the understanding of the savants to understand, because the Nile would flood every year around April, and they were trying to or August, I'm sorry, for about 3 weeks. It was just horrific conditions in Cairo, and they're trying to figure out all these types of things. They were trying to find a lot of the Egyptian artifacts and these types of things. Well, what happened is that they ended up developing a fort. I commissioned this painting, and it's a Fort Julian they wanted to build. And so this is kind of an artist's conception of what it would look like when they found the Rosetta Stone on the west bank of the Nile. And so what happened is that when they found the Rosetta Stone, the reason that they were building the fort is that it was right at the mouth of the Nile, right at the mouth of the Mediterranean. And they figured, if we can build a fort here, I've been there, and you could shoot a cannon across very easily and take out whatever ships might want to go down about 100 miles down to Cairo and do a surgical strike. And so it was a military advantage for the French to build the fort. Remember, they're landlocked now, and they're kind of stuck. The morale of the troops is very low, and so the savants are going everywhere looking for different treasures, different architecture. They had the folks that created this book called the Description de l'Egypte. And I own there are 900 plates. These are about 28 inches tall and about 22 inches wide. And there's a watermark, a mark here that determines the authenticity of these. And so when you hold them up to the light, you can see the words Egypte moderne, and you can determine that's a real plate. And so even though the Egyptian military campaign was a debacle, the timestamp that they created in providing the world an immense amount of information about Egypt and everything, it's just amazing, the amount of information that was timestamped there for the world to know. So from that standpoint, from a cultural, historical standpoint, it was a wonderful win all the way around in that regard. So what happened is that the savants were doing their thing, and there's story after story of being attacked by Ottoman, by the fighters, the Turks, and it's just a lot of bloody battles and skirmishes that emerged. And what happened is that then they, after the Rosetta Stone was found, or I should say uncovered, unearthed on the west bank of the Nile, they looked at the Rosetta Stone, and they saw that there were inscriptions on the Rosetta Stone. Now, Lieutenant Pierre Bouchard was the person who put this together in terms of finding the Rosetta Stone, unearthing it as they're digging out the foundation for what later became known as Fort Julien, and now is known as Fort Rashid. They found that, of course, at the top you have something called hieroglyphics. And this hieroglyphics, it comes from the Greek word priestly, which means priestly carving. So this was an esoteric language known only to the priestly class. And what's interesting is that the three inscriptions, there's two languages and three inscriptions, as you'll see in just a few moments here. The top inscription was connecting with the religious class. The second area, the demotic script, it comes from the Greek word demos. We get the word democracy, just like in the Latin Vulgate. The word Vulgate comes from vulgar. You get the word common. So the common people use this particular inscription. And they're actually the same. Hieroglyphics and demotic script are the same, except this is a cursive form of hieroglyphics. And then the bottom part was Greek. Now, why Greek? Of course, because Alexander the Great had conquered Egypt. And this was a very interesting, hold on a second here, since the Greeks and the Romans were the French, the third nation to explore or conquer Egypt. There are multiple nations that explored. Egypt was kind of wide open to be explored, but the Roman influence was there, the Greek influence was there, and it was pretty much the Ottoman Empire that kind of took over. But it became caliphs, where you had different sections of Egypt being ruled by different rulers, sultans, and so it was kind of balkanized, if you will. But there was not one ruler over Egypt. So it was a kind of an interesting thing. When the French came in, yes, that was the nation after the Romans, if you want to put it this way, that came in and then took over Egypt. So that was a great question. Thank you. I'll try to respond to your questions as quickly as possible if they're relevant to what we're talking about at the moment. And so what happened is that when the French were going all around Egypt with the savants, and they were conquering different aspects of Egypt, in the back of their mind, they're dealing with this whole thing about the Rosetta Stone, because in the last sentence, or the last area of the Greek, it says, "The same thing shall be in all three inscriptions." So if I could use this as an example. So you have in the last part of the Greek, it says the same thing is being written, like a parallel version of a book, or let's say you have a parallel version of the Bible that has the Phillips translation, the King James version, or I like to affectionately call the King Jimmy version, and maybe some other version, NASB or something like that. And that way you can read the same Old Testament or New Testament passage of Scripture in three different views of that Scripture, translations. So the same thing will be in all three inscriptions. Now, many people wonder, well, what was inscribed here? Maybe some of you are already starting to go on your keyboard and ask, what was written on here? What's the content is not something that is that stellar. It's really it's about some priests in Lycopolis. They're on the Nile, and because the Greeks, the Ptolemaic Empire is over them, they had a rebellion against paying temple tax to the Greeks, and so they went on strike. They said, we're not going to do it. And what happened is that then the military came in, they diverted the Nile, and within 2 or 3 weeks, the Greek priests came out, and the Egyptian priests came out with their hands up, and this is all written in here. And they basically said, we give up. We're out of food, out of water, and so Ptolemy, who was a young kid, he was probably no more than about 14 years of age. His father had died, I believe, in battle. And so he was surrounded by a lot of sycophants, a lot of people making decisions for him. But Ptolemy, he was asking them, if you will make, in other words, if they make Ptolemy the fifth a deity, the grand poobah of Egypt, then we will forgive you of the temple tax. We might punish a few of the leaders of your group, but we will forgive you of your temple tax. And then what will happen is that we're going to have you inscribe on this stone, which, by the way, was 45 inches tall, 30 inches wide, and 11 inches thick, weighed 1,700 pounds. On my advisory board, I have our nonprofit, a gentleman by the name of James Harrell, who is the world's leading authority on archaeological geology. And I'm going to do a whole show with him, and he's going to break down a lot of things about Egypt looking at it through the lens of geology. Very fascinating stuff. Well, anyway, I sent him a high resolution scan of the Rosetta Stone, and he told me instantly, he says, I know exactly which quarry that came from. There's only one quarry in all of Egypt that could have come from. And it's called the Aswan Quarry because it's an igneous rock because a lot of limestone, a lot of other types of rock and stone throughout Egypt. But it's the only one that has this particular granodiorite from the igneous family. And so what happened is that as they were looking at this, they thought, we know the same thing. These are savants saying this in Cairo, because after it had been unearthed in Rosetta, it was then taken down to Cairo, about 100 miles southwest or so of Rosetta. And they looked at it and they thought, give us 2 or 3 weeks. We'll figure this out. This will be easy peasy lemon squeezy. And so then what happened is that they looked at the demotic, they looked at the hieroglyphics, because they're looking all around Egypt and on the sides of obelisks and temples you see this hieroglyphics, and they didn't know, is this, did they let a kindergarten class loose in the country? Because there's a sun, there's a moon, there's a wolf, there's a snake, there's a lion, and there's all kinds of these images. And what do they mean? And they did not know, hieroglyphics. Is it read left to right, right to left? Is it phonetic? Is it alphabetic? Is it symbolic? Is it all three? They didn't know. And they had no computer algorithms to use, and no previous experience. But they were very intrigued by, what does this mean? And so, what we found out later is, of course, as I mentioned before, the hieroglyphics is reaching the priestly class. The demotic script is reaching the common people, so they could read this inscription that was basically saying, we honor Ptolemy V, and he is now deity, if you will. And the Greek part, that was connecting with the business and the government class. So even in the Rosetta Stone itself, there are there's different ways that they're trying to connect with the populace about the messaging here. And this was a proclamation, a decree, if you will, that would then cause hopefully they're hoping maybe for a more positive view toward the Ptolemaic Empire that was ruling over the people at that time. So what happened is that then we move forward, because we have Napoleon. He's moving toward Israel. I don't know if you've been to Israel in Jaffa. There's a statue of Napoleon with his hand in his chest area, just holding it like this. And the casual observer or visitor to Israel is saying, what the heck is Napoleon? A statue of Napoleon right here in the busy marketplace, right near the sea, near the Mediterranean, in Jaffa. Well, because Napoleon made a move. He wanted to go to Saudi Arabia, and it's a whole nother story what happened in Israel and marching toward Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of sickness and illness, and it just was a debacle, a terrible situation. It ended up that 1798 is when they arrived, and then around August or so of 1799. Remember, this July is when the Rosetta Stone was unearthed in Rosetta, Egypt. Napoleon never saw the Rosetta Stone one-on-one. He never saw it. He heard about it, of course, but he made his escape back to France to fight more battles, I guess, and left General Kleber in charge of the French troops. And so now we fast forward, and we have all of the. I don't know how he got the ship out of there, because the British were patrolling the waters, but somehow, some way, he snuck out of Egypt and got back to France to fight more battles. And so what happened was then we now move forward where. France is now waving the white flag, proverbially. Yeah, proverbially. They're done. We're put a fork in us. We're finished here. And by this time, there was the general of France army was General Menou. He was probably 5'5", kind of a compact man, a mercurial temper. He was high, low, emotionally. And so what happened is that he had the Rosetta Stone in his camping area. I don't know if he hid it under the sand or what, but he considered the Rosetta Stone to be his own personal property. And you have the general of the British, along with Daniel Edward Clark and some other individuals, Hawthorne. They developed what they called the Capitulation Treaty. And I believe it was Article 16 or 13. I can't remember off the top of my head. But they said specifically, we want all of the stuff that the savants got, because we've got the British Museum. It's full of stuff from all around the world. And there's a lot of ancient Egyptian stuff in there. And they said, we want all the stuff, but specifically, they said, we want the trilingual stone. Now, General Manu, being the mercurial temper that he had, he got very angry, and he said, no, this is my personal stuff. I'm taking it back with me when we capitulate, but you're not going to have the Rosetta Stone. Well, they went back and forth with him, and finally they were able to somehow cajole him into giving up the Rosetta Stone. And what happened was that, oh my goodness, he was threatening at one point. He was going to get out a ball-peen hammer or some kind of a big, I don't know, some kind of a element where he's going to smash the face of the Rosetta Stone. See, what they had done is they'd made a plaster of Paris squeeze, they used the Rosetta Stone as kind of a printing plate. And so they put printer's ink on it, and then they put a large piece of paper over it, and they made several copies of it, which we're going to find out later were used to actually help crack the code to hieroglyphics. But what happened is that they ended up getting it. They took the Rosetta Stone back on a ship called the L'Orient back to Great Britain in 1802, and it was brought into Plymouth Harbor. And then later, it was then brought to what later became known as the British Museum, and still resides there. So now let's take a look. Before we take a look at how they cracked the code to hieroglyphics, I'd like to, Mel, can we share that piece about the Rosetta universe, that video?
I study a lot of languages. That was sort of my major in college. And I'm thinking back to the moment when I was 19 years old and I was at Berkeley. And I remember they gave us a passage of Thucydides, the hardest writer of all to read in ancient Greek. So I had this one paragraph, and I must have spent like 10 hours trying to translate one paragraph. Finally, I go, I think this is the answer. And I turned it into my professor. And he goes, Robert, you were almost there, but you missed it. You completely mistranslated this beautiful paragraph, but you were getting at something. And that had an incredible impact on me even to this day. It developed character. It developed patience. It developed discipline. You've got kids nowadays who are never going to have that experience. These incredible skills that the brain has are going to be atrophying, I fear. The brain is so much more interesting to me than any piece of technology.
Yes, Mr. Green, we are grateful that he shared that, because the project we're working on, and I'll just share this for about 60 seconds, is something called the Rosetta Universe. And it's a project where we're going to be transforming this ancient artifact, along with the epic dramatic story around it, into a modern metaphor for problem solving and critical thinking. As we see what's happening with artificial intelligence, it's everywhere. We back in the day, we had what was known as the Industrial Revolution. We now have 3 revolutions, not only the artificial intelligence, but then also spatial computing, where people put these goggles on and can visit Berlin or anywhere in the world, Sydney, Australia, Tokyo, Japan. We're going out to outer space. And that's spatial computing. And then we have what's known as quantum computing. All 3, I call it the triple revolution. And my concern, even though there are many wonderful things that can come out of that, is that people will park their brains. And I don't know, Cleveland Clinic here in the U.S. Has said that within 2 to 3 weeks of no resistance, muscles can atrophy. In the same way, the brain can atrophy. Yes, it can be challenged, but the brain needs resistance. It needs problems. It needs something to solve. And so what we're going to do is we're developing a 5,000 square foot traveling exhibit that will travel all around North America. And we'll have 4 zones in it. a zone about history, a zone about cracking codes, a zone about language and culture. And then we're taking the word Rosetta, and I've developed 7 steps, which we're going to talk about in another show. 7 steps to solve problems in about 8 to 10 categories of problems. It's an iterative process, because problem solving is not just a lightning bolt coming out of the sky. It is a process. It's hard work solving problems. And so I want to be able to have an alternative for this generation and for older folks also, to be able to become solutionists and to become certified solutionists, to have a K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12 college, university curricula around this, so that we can develop a whole generation of people that can learn how to be solutionists, and also to have the emotional intelligence to not just jump on somebody who's says, I've got a problem, say, I've got the answer, to have the emotional intelligence to wait and to consider. Just like if you have a spouse, my wife, my dear wife, sometimes when she has a problem, she all she needs is a hug, and not for me to solve it. And maybe 24, 48 hours later, I might say, honey, I was just thinking about what you mentioned, and this is a good time to talk about it. Maybe we can come up with some ideas to solve it. So it's just to help to share this. And once the template is done for North America, I'm going to create 2 more for China, 1 for Southeast Asia, 1 for Europe, and 1 that will travel around to cities that aren't serviced by the other orbits, like Sydney, Moscow, Tel Aviv, Rio de Janeiro, Joburg, and then to be able to, at the end of 7 years, donate them to various regions of the world that will become help with jobs and help with and also to help with tourism, and then to raise up a group of citizen problem solvers, solutionist institute, if you will, that will identify the top 25 problems of that region of the world and then go about solving them through the iterative process of the 7-step Rosetta 7-step problem solving process. So that's kind of a quick overview of taking all this wonderful information about the Rosetta Stone and then using this epic drama, because if we just came out with a curriculum, that's not enough. You have to wrap it in a story. And once people understand the story and then the impact of that story, I think this can have a profound impact on people around the world. So now we jump back in and we talk about how was the code to hieroglyphics cracked. Now, what happened is that, of course, they knew what the Greeks said. They could understand that. But now the first thing, see, I had a professor in grad school who told me that whenever there is a consensus, it's wrong. I mean that there had become an emotional link to the consensus, and my task was to find the wrong. I like that. I think that's sometimes it's good to find the wrong. I don't know if you are familiar with a ratchet wrench. Ratchet wrench, you got to do the click, click, click before you loosen or tighten the bolt. And a lot of people view the click, click, click as a backwards move. I don't. I view it as a forward move, because then once you do an analysis, like for R, we're going to learn in another show, is to recognize the problem. And so the whole idea of not becoming like a quote unquote ostrich with the head in the sand. So that's a very good point. I like that. But it's looking for the wrong so that you can make the right, and not parking in the wrong, because a lot of people, they tend to be negative Nellies and are always looking for the wrong and then park there. And I believe in looking at it, staring at it, and then just saying, okay, and running toward it and embracing it, and then saying, now what can we do about this? What are the solutions? What are the options? Let's take the best of the worst if necessary. So anyway, moving along. So they knew what the Greeks said, and they knew that, but they didn't know the Demotic or the hieroglyphics. So what happened is, I don't know if you can see this very well, but in the hieroglyphics, I guess you can't see it very well, but there are at least 5.5 points in the hieroglyphics where you can see, here's one right here, my index finger is pointing to it, and that is a cartouche. you may know what a cartouche is. It's kind of an oval. Here are some examples of cartouches right here. You can see the oval and the hieroglyphics within. And so what? Yes, I agree. Okay, Lenny, that's a good point. And so the cartouche is something that they looked at very carefully, and then they noticed that there's something called the Cleopatra needle that was a gentleman had, Lord Nelson had in his, or Lord Banks, I'm sorry, had in on his property. And on the Cleopatra needle, so you have Cleopatra and Ptolemy. Ptolemy, you got the P in Ptolemy, you got the P in Cleopatra, you have the L in Ptolemy, you have the L in Cleopatra, you have the E in Ptolemy, the E in Cleopatra, the O in Ptolemy, and the O in Cleopatra, and so on. And so it became a puzzle. Now, this is 1799 is when the Rosetta Stone was unearthed. We now fast forward, and it became an international puzzle, if you will, one of the biggest codes to be cracked. I've done a number of symposiums at the National Security Agency here in the United States. And to have at the L3 building, the auditorium, to have it full of cryptologists, and they're quivering with excitement because, we have this, I'm the only one in the world that's created a full-size 3D replica of the Rosetta Stone. They're in private collections, libraries, and museums around the world. In fact, one of my replicas was in the movie Night at the Museum Part 3, one of Robin Williams' last movies, and Ben Stiller was in that movie. And so I have a replica up there, and they're quivering with excitement because it's the granddaddy of code cracking. And so you had different people involved, and so you have different people involved. You have Acherblad from Sweden. You have de Saussay from France. You have Jean Champollion from just outside of Paris. He's originally from Figeac, France. You had Thomas Young. In the song, you saw that. So, and Thomas Young was a gentleman that had come up with some ideas. So, all these people from Germany, from Italy, it became whoever cracks this code is going to become world famous forever. And so, a lot of people got involved. Now, it's interesting. Jean Champollion, he's an interesting character. In fact, this is a painting. I don't know if you can see this, but Jean Champollion, if I can see this here, but Jean Champollion, it was a gentleman who ended up cracking the code. And you can see a little bit about my backdrop here. And so that's all part of the show. And so what happened here is that, and I'm going to fix this stupid, not stupid camera, it's a smart camera, but I'll fix this so this doesn't happen in future shows. Hopefully I'll read up on it. But Jean Champollion, as a young kid, he knew about 16 languages, Arabic, Farsi, all kind, Coptic, all kinds of different, especially Semitic type languages. And so when he heard about what happened in France, about this trilingual stone, he got so excited. He says, I'm going to be the one that cracks the code to it. And he was driven. He spent hours upon hours every day trying to figure this thing out. Well, what happened is that he would get little clues from Thomas Young. In fact, folks told de Saussay, who was the scholar that taught, was one of his instructors, one of Champollion's instructors. He said, be careful, Thomas. He said, Jean will use your information and claim that he thought of it himself. Be careful. And Thomas said, I don't care as long as the code gets cracked. Well, anyway, what happened is that after 23 years, now we're talking 1799 to 1822, after 23 years, the code finally was cracked to hieroglyphics. And this was in September 1822. Now, what happened once the code was cracked, and it was cracked by taking a look at Cleopatra's cartouche, at Ptolemy's cartouche on the Rosetta Stone, and by comparing the two and figuring this out and seeing here's an E over here, is over here, an L, there's a P over here, and then beginning to fill in the blanks. Wow, it unlocked the secrets of ancient Egypt. And this is the cool thing about becoming like someone who's illiterate becoming literate, can now read a menu in a restaurant, can now drive a car and say, oh, there's an exit ramp. I now can read that and I know to take that exit. It's the same holds true for someone who is looking into ancient times. Understanding hieroglyphics now opens up the doorway to see the peoples of ancient Egypt, and to say, wow, that battle happened, that person existed, that family system existed. Wow, women were paid for their work. Here's a receipt written in hieroglyphs. Oh my goodness, this is crazy. That town existed. And so it just unlocked the secrets of ancient Egypt. And that's why we know so much about what happened in Egypt, because the code was cracked and the Rosetta Stone became the key that unlocked the secrets of ancient Egypt. And so that is, and so what happened is that once the code was cracked, of course, then we had a situation where, now how are we going to figure out how to use this information? So young men from wealthy families, they would go to Egypt and places like Egypt, and they would bring pickaxes and shovels and sticks of dynamite. They blow stuff up, maybe 80, 90% of a dig, because you have what's known as a tell, a hill, and then you drill down. This is just in layman terms, just drill down, 10, 20, 30, 40 feet or so, and then get pieces of pottery. And there are people that are experts that can take a look at a piece of pottery and say, oh, this comes from the Iron Age or the Bronze Age or whatever the age is. And then to attack that hill with a toothbrush, a paintbrush, a trowel, and with a knife, with just taking it layer by layer, centimeter by centimeter, and then beginning to expose and understand the mores, the folkways of the people that were a part of this particular community or this particular site, this village, this civilization. And so what would happen is young men would come home and they'd bring a mummy with them. And then maybe on a Friday night, you'd have people, they're drinking their tea with their pinkies hanging out, or drinking wine, and they're having a party, and they're having a mummy unwrapping party. People would be oohing and awing and flipping out, freaking out, because it was such a weird kind of situation. Well, the international community said, halt, we got to stop that. No more going into these lands and blowing stuff up. So the soft science of archaeology began to emerge, and it became a situation where now it became forbidden to go in with pickaxes and shovels and blowing stuff up. It was Jean Champollion, this gentleman I just showed. He's the one that cracked the code, but there are many contributors to it to answer a viewer's question. And so his name is Jean Champollion. And so so then what happened is that the international community, they began to develop this whole concept or soft science of archaeology. And then we have biblical archaeology. I'm a huge fan of the Bible. I've traveled all around the world, over 55 countries, and I've hiked throughout the Qumran caves and done all kinds of different things, just trying to figure things out for myself, get a sense of these places. And the thing that has emerged is that, and we're going to do a whole show on on archaeology and the Bible and some other types of things, the Dead Sea Scrolls and some other things that help to fit into that. But it's the most amazing thing to have these different disciplines surrounding archaeology, the geology involved, the topography, all of these different, the historicity, and then taking ancient literature and matching to see if what we're learning it matches with the spade of archaeology. And so anyway, the Rosetta Stone has contributed so much to all of this, and we owe a great debt. And I'll close with this, because I have to bring this plane in for a landing. What happened with me is that I had a crisis of faith. back when I was a young man, and I began to study internal, external evidences of Scripture, prophecy, science, mathematics. I hit it from different disciplines. I just wanted to understand from an intellectual standpoint and to see if this was true. And everywhere, when I was looking at the state of archaeology and the reliability of the Scriptures, I began to bump into the Rosetta Stone. And I never thinking that I would own a collection and be doing what I'm doing today at 7 decades on the planet later, or I guess 5 decades after that. But it became a situation where the Rosetta Stone was very interesting. I then acquired a face of the Rosetta Stone in an auction from a gentleman who was a foreign journalist from Vermont, but he was in Great Britain. He acquired one of maybe 12, a dozen to 15 one-to-one first-generation replicas of the face of the Rosetta Stone from the British Museum. I acquired it from him. I paid a king's ransom for it. But when it arrived, I thought, what if I found a stone sculptor that could recreate the sides and the rear of the Rosetta Stone, developed a replica, a mold, and then the rest is history. And I launched the project at the Library of Congress in D.C. And then it wasn't until 2013, I was watching a show on History Channel, and they brought together a group of SMEs, subject matter experts, for about a year, I think. They looked at all the different things, the objects that changed the world, and they came up with a show called 101 Objects That Changed the World, and they did it in hierarchical format. And what happened is that when I saw this, of course, they started 101, came all the way up to 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, the drama. Number 1 was the Bible. The objects changed the world. Number 2 was coinage, money. And number 3, the Rosetta Stone. And I'm sitting there going, the Rosetta Stone beat out the wheel. It beat out the computer. It beat out the Gutenberg, the press. It beat out all these different, spaceships and all these, the automobile. How is that possible? And I thought, I must be missing something. And then hence my attraction to this, and then now developing this project. I held off. I started in 2005, but held off until I became 70 years of age to pull the trigger. And this is my retirement project. And so it's just something that if you want to learn more about it, just go to rosettauniverse.com, rosettauniverse.com. And there will be a whole bunch of information, videos, and things like that. On our advisory board, we have Dr. Ben Carson, Smokey Robinson, Kathy Hughes, and a number of other people that will astonish you. I mean, I'm astonished. And so what I'd like to do is, for the rest of the show, if there's no more questions, is just to say to you just to check out the Rosetta Stone and to learn more about it, because this is one of the most fascinating artifacts and objects in the world. It is transcendent. No matter where you go, you have the Rosetta Project, Genome Project. You have the European Space Agency had the Rosetta Project, where they were checking out comets. They were flying next to comets and trying to understand more about them, and ended up smashing the ship into a comet to end the program deliberately. And so you have all these different views, and it has now become a situation where you can describe, that person has developed the Rosetta Stone to you name it, to code cracking, to IT security, to whatever it might be. So there are many disciplines: publishing, mathematics, and all kinds of different disciplines connect with the Rosetta Stone. And so the more and more you learn about it, the more excited you'll become, and the more you'll become an evangelist of the Rosetta Stone and its story. Well, we'll close right now. We have an out here, but go to rosettauniverse.com, check it out, and learn for yourself. And I'll see you next time. We're going to talk about the 7-step process called the Rosetta 7-step problem-solving process. I think you'll be fascinated. I have a song for you then and some more information. Ebity, that's all, folks.
You have just experienced another episode of the Mischief Maker broadcast. Hit the subscribe button, Connect at chiefmischiefmaker.com. Thanks for coming along for the ride. And hopefully, you are now a bit closer to becoming a mischief maker in your part of the world.